All right, macro perspective community. What's going on, y'all? Got another amazing episode coming right at you. So today we have another special guest. We've had quite a few of them here lately. We have Arnava with us today to really kind of dive into some deeper, just different things relating to kind of our framework a little bit, because he's so like and mentioning it really being aligned to that kind of the core five. So we'll try to kind of keep things in that scope, and then aligned with his expertise as well. So Arnava, I'm going to let you kind of give us an introduction, because I feel like I won't do it justice. Let people know kind of who you are, what you do, your specialty and your focus, and we'll then take it from there.
Thank you, Marcos. I'm Arnava Asen. I'm a lot of things, and I think on this podcast, if I had to guess, we were going to talk about, I'm a family man, probably first and foremost. I go deep into a lot of different fitness modalities in my personal life. I also work with a ton of different fitness brands, which sort of begins to reveal the fact that I run a wonderful and wonderfully little branding and brand marketing agency called Better, with two partners and a bunch of freelancers. And then in terms of kind of other things I would imagine we'll wind up touching on, I also grew up in the great state of New York, in the great city of New York. And I have a particularly odd background, thus my name, whereby, my mother was sort of in a cult for quite a while. So there's a whole fun little balance between things of faith and that kind of world, and things of just money, like New York. But I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah. So Better. Well, for one, do you spell it with some sort of funky spelling for that brand name, or what?
No,
No, just literally just
Better. All the vowels
okay.
are there. Right. It's spelled how it is.
Okay, I had to ask, because there was actually ironically, there's like a Better Health brand that's positioned inside of the gym that I go to, and I see the sign every day on when we're doing chest, and I'm like, is it related? Obviously it isn't, but I had to ask because theirs is like Bettr, I think. So they dropped the vowel. So,
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so what got you into what you do? Like, what's kind of the origin story?
Yeah. I was 15 years old. I remember it clear as day. I had gone. I don't know why I was outside of Madison Square Garden, but there I was, and there was at the time, I think probably still today, there's this massive billboard like right outside the front of it, and Nike has forever kind of owned it. And at this time, this billboard had no imagery on it. It was just white with black copy. There was a check at the bottom, and all the copy said was, "Yesterday, you said tomorrow." Yeah. I mean, I still get chills every time I even utter that thing. And I just looked at that and thought, my God, if they can move me to not only buy, but 15 years later still be talking about, something of that profundity, then I want to know what that is, how that works, and so forth. And what I was really looking at, I think now, 15 or 15 years later, no, 30 something years later, what I'm now sort of realizing is that what they captured, or what they engineered, was remarkability. And I wanted to figure out kind of what that means. So I should also sort of mention, growing up in New York, everyone is somehow connected to marketing. Somehow, everyone's parent or friend of the parent or whatever. So you're very exposed to kind of the marketing world. So I went into university sort of knowing that's what I wanted to do. Now, I didn't go to the university necessarily for that. I went to the University of California at Davis, and I went to Davis largely because I wanted as opposite an experience to growing up in New York City as humanly possible. And so, the farms of Sacramento were really just calling to me. Um, and yet, I hit the ground running. I mean, I think a lot of kids out in Cali at that time, and it's true to even today and going into university, like had no idea what they were there to study. I did. And so I managed through the psychology department and the what was then called American Studies, sociology. I was able to really kind of define um, a pretty robust curriculum in consumer psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I did that for 4 years. I didn't want to go into anthropology properly. I really like, believe it or not, the science of kind of commercializing creativity. And so again, I wanted to get into it. I bopped around for a couple of years after college. I spent a bunch of time in India, as one does, motorcycling and meditating and all that.
The
Um,
Chanterelle.
you can't get away from going to India. If you don't read Shantaram, then inadvertently you are sort of writing Shantaram as you go. But yes,
Yeah.
I certainly did the Shantaram sort of experience. And I spent a bunch of time at my mother's guru's ashram. So that's why invariably we're going to get to this sort of place. And one of the things that really blew my mind in this ashram and from the guru was this idea of, as he calls it, kind of Zorba the Buddha. And Zorba the Buddha is sort of an avatar, or like it's just an idea for, as Seamus and I were talking about, like balance, and I know that sounds, further out to the question that you asked, but what I was really inspired by in that time, and what you can't avoid being inspired by spending time in India, is just how amazingly you can brand things that are still really good. Like you can effect sales by soft selling. You can, contain spirituality in a brand mark. You can make a garbage truck look beautiful. Like there was this something quite remarkable about achieving that kind of balance. So I came back to New York kind of very inspired to somehow cultivate kind of that perspective or that burgeoning thesis. But I was young and dumb, and I didn't know what I didn't know, so I had to gain experience.
Yeah.
And God bless, I worked whatever connections I could and got in at a package design agency called Pearl Fisher. And Pearl Fisher, I just caught fire at the minute I walked in that door. I loved everything about it. The people who I was working with, I fell in love with instantly. One of them would wind up becoming my business and life partner, mother of my children. Others, I've married two people in that company, meaning I officiated their whatever. I am still friends with almost everyone I worked with. I mean, these things don't happen like that anymore. So I really
Yeah.
sort of caught this wonderful moment from Pearl Fisher, though, and pack design, where you really learn the warfare for attention, or for share of mind, share of heart, share of wallet, and how much, it comes down to how you design the pack, the messaging on the pack, the real estate that's only that big, and you're going to somehow,
Yeah.
impact whatever. But I knew that was limiting. I needed to sort of go upstream in terms of commercial creativity, like I was saying earlier. So I jumped ship. I went to an innovation consultancy, and that, I mean, literally, as the name implies, like it was all what if Thinking. It's the name of the company. What If? And that was part two of just a magnificent education. At the same time, I got my master's at Parsons in strategic design management. And that was, a wonderful experience in and of itself. I traveled the world. I worked for all kinds of, Fortune 50s, helping them solve these incredibly large problems that would inform brand. But you spend that much time traveling, you're exhausted, your wife wants to start a family, I wanted to start a family. And I sort of bopped around for a couple of years afterward at different agencies, each one with kind of a similar structure and proposition. And I think during that weird sort of time where I was sort of, my skills were strong enough to be dangerous, but I wasn't in charge yet. I was never particularly good at managing people. I just always found, it slightly disappointing. And then I said, fuck it. And, I'm going to just try it my own thing. And freelancing, I met a bunch of people. One creative director in particular, he and I did a bunch of work together that was magnificent. We really fell for each other. We are complete opposites. And so yet again, the idea of balance kind of comes into light. And we've grown the business over the last probably 5 years strong enough that, we could bring in the truly missing piece of, I think, most creative agencies, which is a strong operations person. And that just so happened to be my wife, who was also dealing with a bunch of agencies where she was sort of in charge as the managing director, but also sort of not. And so she wanted something that was a new challenge and better balance. And so we've been doing this thing for a little bit of time now, and it's just been gangbusters. And I realize I'm rambling.
Wow.
So.
No, that's a beautiful story. I think, the whole coming out to California and going out to India and then finding the guru and then going from agency to agency kind of shows the compilation of where you're at right now, Arnava. I think one thing I wanted to ask, kind of all this, is, Marcos and I have a background more like in the performance health, nutrition. Marcos specifically got his degree in like math. I'd say we're more like logic brain. I'll just say it like that, like short term. I never understood kind of like consumer sciences or consumer psychology until realizing like I'm working with people, like even though you might know the textbook of what a muscle or the heart does, right? Explaining that to someone and explaining the cool, the way to get them to want to buy it, like you said, the soft sell. I wanted to ask, like, what were some of the big key takeaways, probably in the agencies you worked for, or this last 5 years that you've had this big triumph? What are the consumer practices or consumer psychologies that you've seen as trends that are like principles for most agencies, or for like the work you've done, or just what you've seen as like principles of like, this is what sets things on fire, this is what sets a brand to really pop out, whether you could use some examples or something like that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to try and pick off a bunch that I think are maybe little pearls of wisdom. Number one, like maybe at the most, no pun intended, but macro level, the fact of the matter is that consumers, I mean, I'm a Henry Ford thinker. They don't know what they want, but what they want is to think that they know what they want, and that ultimately the thing that you're putting in front of them, they knew all along, that's what I wanted. So it's a game of persuasion. You are, insights matter, spending time with the consumer matters, but you are not the consumer. Like the minute you get into this business, you have to acknowledge the tendency, and I've seen it time and time again, to project your own opinions sort of onto the work. Well, I like X, Y, and Z, therefore this concept, this campaign, this positioning, this whatever message should be more like that. And of course, you can post-rationalize anything. Most of the people in this industry are very convincing, very confident. But I think the things that really are, like, succeed, work well, are usually ones where you deeply listened, and you heard something that got said, and it never happens in some boom eureka moment where the consumer said, "Oh, I just want to feel happiness," and then Coca-Cola says, it's happiness. We need to be selling happiness. No, you synthesize it. You're seeing patterns in behavior. You're seeing patterns in opinion that the consumer's telling you. And then you have to take that one step further, which leads me to the next point. The next point is it's all a pendulum. Everything is cyclical up to a certain point. That we're seeing, a resurgence of 90s nostalgia, but that it's a generation that didn't grow up in the 90s sort of liking it, is not dissimilar from me growing up in the 80s and fetishizing the 60s, or kids growing up in the aughts and fetishizing the 80s. Like, these are patterns that the consumer should never really be aware of, because they have, they spend their time being consumers. Like, that's exactly what they should do. Now, the interesting thing about a pendulum model, as opposed to just saying everything comes back around, what's old is new again, is that it never comes back around exactly as it was, like exactly the same way. You can't sell the old product necessarily in the old way. And so that's where it gets really important to, as I oftentimes say, like, weaponize creative. And that takes real strategy, and that takes real timing, and that takes real adaptation.
Yeah.
And and it's a science. I know that it seems not to be one, because it's playing with creative things.
Yeah.
But when I am pitching a strategy, or I'm presenting, this is our way forward, I always call it a play to win, because of two reasons. One, the objective is winning something: awareness, affinity, conversion, etc. But then also, it is a play. You need to run it over time. That ad campaign from Nike was part of a much larger thing. And it was just one piece of a larger war that they're in at the time. And so I think, thinking through it kind of that way, consumer psychology being something that is very fluid, ever changing, and you must wade in those waters. Consumer psychology also being something that has a pattern to it, and so you need to be the forest for the trees. And then consumer psychology being something that is fickle and reactive, and when you try and sell too hard, or there's no emotional leverage, or you're just selling a product, you get pushback. And so you have to constantly be adapting between, I'm selling you the brand, but now I'm selling you the product, and or maybe vice versa, or it's this message isn't working, so I have to now change it to that message. So those would be my kind of three big pillars of consumer psychology wisdom.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the pendulum, because it's like, okay, I'll geek out with like physics or math with it. Like, if you think of a pendulum, like the initial push you gave into it, it's never going to come back, like you said, completely all the way to where it was, because that's just how the physics work, right? So as soon as you bring up that like kind of analogy, it's like, yeah, it's like getting back to that, but it has to have like the modern feel to it. I was actually staring at a photo of my parents' restaurant. They were in Bon Appetit magazine, back in the 90s. And then they were also in like the LA Times, or the LA, it was again like a newsprint, something that was fairly reputable. And I'm looking at this plaque, and I was like, who in the hell decided to go all pink inside of this restaurant? I was like, Mom, Dad, like, who designed this? And they're like, I think that was my grandma, actually. Like, that was like kind of her thing. And I wish she was alive to have asked that question if I was younger. And I was like, that just doesn't seem like it would. I mean, I know it wouldn't work today, but like some of the themes, like you're saying, like some of those colorways or certain like styles or maybe wallpaper or certain elements start to come back. And I just sat there and thought like a couple days ago, and I was like thinking about, they talked about how there was mobsters, like Las Vegas mobsters that would come and frequent their restaurant back in the day. And I was like, this is the place that they were seeing. Like I couldn't envision like my like version of a mobster from like the movies, like going into that, like big crime family, like Las Vegas people at this like pink restaurant. Like that's literally like the image that was in my head. But I think too, like even in the movie,
this restaurant at?
They had it in the late 80s, early 90s. Basically, right. They stopped doing it. They called it Manfredi's Limelight back in the day. And it was this little place where, ironically, they probably could have kept it open for ages if they had gaming in it. Like that was like the deterring factor for them, like staying very profitable, was just having a bar that had gaming, which, at the time it was just like, oh, does that make sense to do this? Like we're a restaurant, damn it. We're from the East Coast. They're from Ohio. They're like, you don't need gaming. You're all about the food. So it was just really interesting to think of that. And that pendulum swing and like that thought, like you just said, I immediately think of like the Miami Heat, like the basketball team. Like they brought back like that Miami Vice type of theme for their colorways inside of their jerseys. And immediately as like, that's like from, I don't know, the 80s or the 90s. Like, but it's like with the modern twist, like they're not wearing like the bomber jacket or, certain elements like that, but they're wearing their, tighter fitting uniforms and everything that's like, kind of modern, but bringing back like these colors, and it has like that nostalgic feel. And like, that's like part of like that trendiness, and me as a consumer, like you just said, is like, oh, I that reminds me of like my childhood, like something nostalgic about it.
Yeah.
Then plays into my own psychology of like, that is cool. Like I can think about it from like a Pokemon perspective. My son's into it. I was like, I was into it when I was my son's age. They're bringing it back 25 years later, not that it really went anywhere, to be honest with you, because like they've done a good job of keeping the brand alive for a long time. But like, I think psychology around what you might be interested, I think it may have been what you were interested in as a kid, and that's why the pendulum swings, right? Like, yeah, it's just super, super interesting about like the kind of pendulum theory of what you're saying.
I think the centrifugal force of this sort of pendulum comes from a couple things. One, none of us live long enough or are, at our peak consumption for long enough to ever really realize that a generation or two before us was kind of doing the same thing. Like we just lack perspective, so we think it's all, kind of new and all of that. Number two, the journey in life is, I would imagine, not even imagine, I know on some level, like, you spend a lot of your youth craving, newness and independence and, counterculturalism, et cetera, et cetera. And then you peak, and there's a whole period of time where you're sort of in this doldrum of like, what am I anymore? But then at some point you enter into nope, I love exactly who I am and all the stuff that I grew up with, and I'm a little nostalgic, but I'm just really comfortable in it. And it's a totally kind of different phase, which is why another thing that I find myself talking a lot about is marketing comes down to, or branding comes down to, fundamentally in terms of consumer psychology, like really you're selling two things. You're selling fountain of youth, or you're selling heaven on earth. That's it. And that changes, both over time and for individuals and in different communities. It obviously means different things, but we're an animal that's just aware that it's going to die and has to spend its whole life, in that fear, and that's what motivates a lot of consumption. What's his name? The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker is a magnificent book. And I think, if you're fascinated by consumer psychology, go read Becker.
Gonna be one on the list for sure.
Yeah. Please, I love that book. I try and read it, frequently throughout life. Interesting, Marcos. I do want to call out, none too ironically, that in the late 70s, early 80s, My father had a restaurant in Manhattan called Wings. And would you believe that the entire interior was pink? Everything was pink.
Yeah.
Except the
Literally.
bathrooms, which were all mirrored for obvious
Cocaine.
reasons. 100%. And that aesthetic, listen, that aesthetic comes and goes. And so I think, if you're trying to pinpoint, like, that's the problem also. It's very hard to pinpoint the pendulum. Fashion, I think, is where you can kind of see it the best, because every so often, bell bottoms come back, but they're slightly different. But then it's going to be, skinny jeans invariably in another couple of years, like that'll come back, and it'll flux between the two. Typography.
It's so funny. We were
please.
like, Rachel, our producer, were talking about this, how like Juicy Couture, or like the early 2000s, the tracksuits, the Uggs, and then there was the other one, the guys used to wear,
saying juicy.
The pink, juicy pink. And then for the guys, it was this other thing. It's kind of like almost like tattoo shop kind of shirt. Ed Hardy.
Oh,
and I was
Hardy.
Like, I remember, like, that was like a phenomenon that you go everywhere. And it was like, I was like middle schooler then, but it was like, you see adults wearing it. I was like, whoa, this is like, it's like fashion. Those things are like, it looks like they might be coming back or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could say the same thing about mustaches and beards. There was a period of time when men were clean shaven, then they weren't. Now they are something in between again. The thing that I'm most excited by, kind of in all of that pendulum stuff, is that, and with my point about Fountain of Youth, is those old rules. They're just not working anymore. Like that we always need to market to the youth, that the young, are the arbiters of cool and culture and so forth, or that heaven on earth looks like a white picket fence, a 2.5 family, and a whirlpool. Something just changed, and I firmly believe that what changed was the consequence of what's called peak stuff. We just flooded every category with so much crap and so much choice that at some point now, it just sort of shifted. And now I find in my marketing, challenging as it is, that not everything needs to look like Warby Parker or Casper or whatever. Not everything needs to be about Gen Z influencers who have no money and are fickle and would rather buy secondhand. Yeah. That Gen X and older millennials and boomers, oh no, they're so uncool. Sure, but they've got disposable income. And this is where sort of the commerce side of it needs to be balanced with, the creative side of it. I could keep going, but, this is where, again, I think we stop before we start in my agency. We measure twice to cut once. And a lot of it rests on what's the insight informing the opportunities? What are the opportunities that are shaping the strategy? And how does the strategy then determine all of the mechanisms of brand, which is just one weapon in a business's arsenal? But should the logo be maximal or minimal, serifed or not, should ultimately be informed by a strategy which speaks to the insights that were gleaned early on. I refuse to do a project that doesn't have that kind of dynamic to it.
Yeah, no, those are great insights. Marcus and I are going to put our heads together when we're connecting, because we finally figure out some things for ourselves, but we've got to figure out how to branch out there, and having a campaign from those dynamics will inevitably, will make sure that each action and each step and each little thing iterates what we're trying to get out there. And like you said, not necessarily being the consumer, but being able to understand what that pendulum kind of looks like, or how to get to them. And I think it's an area that I'd say I'm like on training wheels on. So everything you're saying here, notes. But I want to kind of move the conversation to, I know we were talking out before the cameras were rolling, some of the campaigns you've worked on, and I would love to highlight some of the best, or the ones that you learned from maximally utilizing the, systems and the ideas and the science you've used to leverage virality or conversion, say whatever it is. What are some of the campaigns you've worked on recently, or maybe in your tenure, that you know get a lot of flack for? You're like, this is the one, I always use this story, or just some of your favorite thoughts, Arnava.
Yeah, I mean, the one that comes to mind, first, one that I'm particularly proud of because it led to, it wasn't the sole cause of, but it certainly helped, a really important moment for a business and a very significant exit for a founder. And so in that regard, again, like there's a business objective. The brand that I'm speaking about is Solidcore. So for anyone who knows, this is a fitness boutique fitness class. It's Pilates, but like severe Pilates. Like it's Pilates if you like puking at the end because you're just so exhausted. And I'm
Pilates
saying
is
all of
hard
that
enough.
largely because, yeah, Pilates is hard enough. This really takes it to another level. The product is magnificent. Like it just is. It took very little, for me to realize that, taking their courses, meeting with consumers, clients, however you like, talking to staff, talking to people who went to and then left, went to and stayed on, had all kinds of different backgrounds, but all found, something really important in this brand. And at some point, the in my sort of research, speaking with consumers and gleaning these kinds of insights, someone had said something about the work. That the work of it was what they really came for. That it was sort of 1 hour that they could go and just work their brains out. Blah 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 blah. Now that same sentiment was also being articulated as torture, the pain of it, just negative, 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 negative. But I was seeing this pattern emerge amongst some. It was not all, but some who really sort of saw the idea of the work being the benefit, not the abs, not the sweat, all these conventional sort of things that fitness usually sort of gloms onto, but that the work itself kind of was the benefit. Now we were coming out of COVID, and would you believe? And I had nothing to do with this, but they were very successful during COVID. How, I have no idea. That's a different podcast.
Was it a reformer
coming
Pilates,
out
or
of
was it like Matt or
reformer
Solidcore?
Pilates.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
Wow,
so
that's wild.
how were they operating during COVID?
Virtual non-reformer sort of classes.
Okay.
And you'd have to get Anne, the founder, to kind of explain it, or Brian, the CEO, to explain it. They're both
Yeah,
genius level
they probably fostered a
operators,
huge community
but all the
vibe,
same,
and yeah, just it killed it in the community setting when
yeah,
people
they
needed it
did well.
most.
And this is the point that I'm going to eventually sort of get to is, what we did with those insights, was we put a strategy together that was going to, like, we could see this trend emerging that we really wanted to hitch our wagons to, which is commonly kind of referred to as hope core, which makes total sense. And this is the pendulum again. We've all been very cynical. We've all been in a mental health doldrum for however long. We're coming out of that. People want to hope again. Positivity is cool again. Blah, 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 blah. So all of that led to a campaign called The Work is the Joy. And it was all about shining a light on, different individuals who were going there for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with, well, ancillary to losing weight or looking great or cut or whatever. We talked to people internally and shine the camera on them. We talk to people, who are clients and shine the camera on them. And it just touched something, it just touched something with their community that felt, I'm being heard, that's me. And it proselytized a message. And this is, again, sort of, how you can hear the consumer say something, but it only brings you to a point, and then at some point you need to take that further and give them something they haven't heard. And so it proselytized a message that I think just took this philosophy, to another level. And again, the product backed it, the marketing was behind it, and it really sort of supercharged, what they were doing coming out of COVID. They needed that burst of wind in their sales. Now, that same kind of idea, those principles, also speak really nicely to a couple of years that I spent sort of helming brand marketing at And Pizza. And Pizza is a fast casual pizza concept on the Eastern Seaboard. The founder is a very good friend of mine. He and I have done a ton of work together. And he really taught me, Marcos, I think to your point, the value of two things. One, it's community building. It's actually not marketing.
Mm-hmm.
It's community building. And then I think he takes it a step further and was very prescient about the proper dynamics of tribal kind of marketing. What he understood about tribal marketing and what I try and bring to a lot of my clients, and what I definitely was activating with Solidcore, was yes, you're trying to sell them on your reformer or your pizza or your golf clubs or your shoes or whatever the case may be. But given the way that social media works, and that being just such an important piece to all of this, the brand now needs to play kind of a role of not following the consumer, God forbid, but facilitating their sort of experience. We can't lead them anymore. They don't want us to. And really, we had no place doing it. If you look back on, the 1950s through the 1980s and how marketing was done then, it really treated the consumer like an idiot. Now, when I started and said, I'm a strict Henry Ford kind of, the consumer doesn't know what they want, that doesn't mean they're stupid. And that doesn't mean I need to lead them in some sort of pseudo gaslit kind of way towards buying my product over someone else's. But what we find ourselves in now is brands need to really allow tribal marketing to happen bottom up. What is this tribe fascinated by? What interests them? How do they talk? What are the insights that determine the dynamics of this community? And then how can I, as a brand, give to it? Because by giving to it, by facilitating it, by participating in it, by being a good member of it, I'm really lending them something that they don't have, which is a megaphone. My marketing dollars are really in service of their interests. And that's a win-win, because what winds up happening is you're creating a community of evangelists who will ride or die for, what it is that you're doing because of how much value you've given them and their beliefs and their voice and their whatever. Patagonia is obviously the great example, of this, and they knew it from day one. Yeah, they knew it from day one. They saw what was coming, or maybe they didn't, and they just got lucky. I don't know. And there's a gazillion other examples of that, but it's definitely, it's definitely something that I've seen become increasingly powerful and increasingly hard for clients to wrap their head around, because every dollar should affect a direct sort of change. We're so trained, especially coming out of COVID, to believe in direct influence, when in fact, it's oftentimes it affects, the opposite. Now, recently I'm working with a client, and I won't name names simply because of the touchy nature of it, but they have a very different challenge where they have to shift communities, right? So it doesn't matter what the product is necessarily, but the product was suffering because the community around it was, the world is changing, and the community had to kind of as well to keep the product sort of where it needs to be. And so we find ourselves literally in the throes, as we speak, of a very difficult strategy of moving, kind of from one community to another. Now, my whole strategy has been largely around opening the aperture of that community kind of where possible. But in some circumstances, no, like you are going to not appeal to everyone. And I think brands need to be probably okay with that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My head is turning right
pivoting.
now, Marcos. I feel like a lot of the things that you kind of shared there, I was like, community building, really opening that up. I mean, Marcos, we're talking about this like every day.
I know. Well, it's funny though, because you mentioned Patagonia, and then I think about kind of the boom of Lululemon, about like the guy was like upstairs above a yoga studio, went downstairs with like his prototypes, giving it to people, getting immediate feedback, literally being like, how do I make the perfect pant for these women? And like that was like the origin story that you hear when I worked for Lululemon like 10 years ago. And same thing as like the guys apparel was like that in the beginning. And then it's kind of turned into something different. It's pivoted a lot because they have like such a strong brand presence that they don't have to like rely on some of the stuff, or they kind of go outside the box too much where I'm like, it doesn't really appeal to me anymore. Right. And then I think of Viore, which is like basically the new Lululemon, where they're listening to the consumer again, and they're taking that feedback and they're applying it over and over again. And they were like, we're just going to target men. And I was like, hell yeah. Like instead of like the women, then to men. And now they're like, women started liking how well it fit their husbands, that they're like, well, we might as well do women's clothing too. And then they're exploding as a company and organization.
I love those Sunday joggers. Oh my God.
I know. Like I was on the fence of, lately I've been I guess nihilistic with regards to like brand thing. I was like, I don't want any type of branding on anything I'm wearing. I'm just like, I don't want any association with anybody. I don't want people to know what I'm wearing. The more discreet, the better. And so I like was seeking stuff out like that. And then I did find a few things. And then I also liked it because I was like, oh, this fits like Lululemon, but it's not. And I don't have to walk around thinking it's like a status thing. And it's also half the cost, which was great. And now they're as expensive as Lululemon. I'm like, okay, well now I need to find a new one of those guys. And that's just like, again, like everybody that's a consumer of a good, you want something out of it that's probably super unique, and people who capture the right thing then could have some, like Arnava, I think you were talking about like basically a raving fan, right? Someone that's not going anywhere because of like the core values that brand holds so near and dear. And sometimes they do shift because they want to capture, let's be real, they probably get a board of directors and their goal is to grow the company because they've gone public, right? Like usually I feel like that's the case. When that happens, then a lot of the things that I was interested in, they kind of like die out for me. It changes and it's not my cup of tea anymore. Just, I'm like, all right, well,
Yep.
But
look, and this is a classic, scale is the enemy of brand. We see it all the time. Here's what's going to happen. Viore is going to expand into women. They're going to lose men sort of as a result. They're going to grow too big for their britches, but someone at the top is going to make $1 gazillion. Private equity is going to get involved if they haven't already, or whatever the case is going to be, and then they'll get acquired by a Nike or a Lululemon and all of that. Who knows? And then someday, either they'll be revived as some kind of zombie brand because you've forgotten about it, or they've got their hat in their hands kind of thing. But before that time, they will likely try and win you back with so many promotions and just cheapen your perception of the brand over time. They'll pump a ton of money into digital marketing and just try and sort of be in front of you as much as possible. And eventually, another brand will come along and you'll fall in love with them, and the same thing kind of repeats. This is the cycle that we find ourselves in a lot. I think the Patagonias of the world, the I dare say Ben and Jerry's of the world, the Nikes of the world, I did a bunch of work for years, actually. It was like a multi-year project. It was an innovation project with the Four Seasons.
Mm.
And what the Four Seasons really beat into me was just how critical and how good the ROI is when you can convert someone who you have right there into, an evangelist. The work that I did with the Four Seasons, was small in sort of comparison, but it afforded me an experience of visiting many of them and speaking to a lot of GMs and kind of all of that. And what was remarkable, I'll never forget it, and it really it informs a lot of my work as a strategist. But the first time I stayed in a Four Seasons, I had ordered a carrot juice with my breakfast. And I don't even remember. I think it was in like Thailand or something. It's like, where's a carrot? But
Yeah.
all the same, like they produced. Then the second time I stayed at a Four Seasons, I ordered a carrot juice. And the third time I stayed at a Four Seasons, I didn't order a carrot juice. When I went to check in, they met me at the guest services desk with a carrot juice. That, I think, is emblematic of where brand versus money and just throwing money at it really matters. They saw me, they saw a pattern, they capitalized on that pattern, they shot their shot in a creative way, and they won me. And for life, I tell that story. And can I afford staying at a Four Seasons? No. Like, I'm doing well, but not that well.
Yeah.
And yet, here I am. I'm talking about it, however many years, 15, 10, something years later.
It's so powerful because like that was always something that, managing gyms, I always had to, how does a gym have a culture of people, like you talk about raving fans that keep coming in? I think Rachel, our producer, is doing a great job of this, is giving us a little sneak peek of the person or something that they're doing this week, or if they had a trip or something like that, or someone's birthday. And, people come to the gym and they're thinking, oh, I'm just here to train. But then they get an email because the trainer said, oh, they're going on vacation. But the rest of the team said, they get an email, hey, we heard you were going to Thailand. We found the area that you're going to. Here's some of the gyms and here's some of the workouts you can do. And for them to like, how do they know that? Like, I think that just so goes beyond, like when you go above and beyond for a consumer to show them like, oh, we're just doing it to serve you. We noticed something and we heard something. We're thinking of you. And it just so goes beyond. That keeps someone around forever.
And Seamus, that is the best articulation of what I mean by kind of bottom up tribal marketing. If your whole community likes carrot juice, then make them carrot juice instead of trying to sell them on your juicer or whatever the case. You see what I'm saying? Like it's just a different approach, and it's harder to quantify. The data isn't as fast. You'd feel a little less in control, but the impact is outsized when you stack it up against a lot of other mechanisms of marketing that I think people use to try and juice awareness or affinity or whatever the case is. No pun intended again.
I think this story reminds me of, I don't know where I was listening to it or where I heard it, was like how good Target's Target algorithm was about predicting. Like they were the best predictor of if a woman was pregnant based off of their shopping habits all through their purchases.
Of course.
And then they were already sending out mailers to people unbeknownst to them, like, hey, like we have a deal on diapers and formula, or like, pre-registry items. And they're like, I didn't tell anybody about this. How does Target know? And it was all just based off of these tendencies of items that were there. And then obviously we know what happened to Target here recently with some of their backlash. And also we could look at like Bud Light and their backlash with stuff, right? But when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, like Target was like the originator of like marketing algorithms based off of shopping habits. Like that was like kind of blowing my mind how they were so good. And as a kid, I was like, why does everybody like Target so much? Like, why do people prefer shopping there over like places that are obviously cheaper? And it was because they were getting mailers that were like targeted to them before it was as quantifiable as it is into the modern age, where you're talking about something and then we're going to open up our phone on Instagram and we're going to get a targeted ad because we spoke it into existence. I swear to God, I every time I needed an ad here lately, I'm like, blah blah blah, it does this and this, and then I'm like, just give me a second, and I'll scroll through every third post, and I'm like, oh, there it is, finally, I found it again, and I share it with somebody.
There it is. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But the carrot juice, and I think what you're really speaking to with like that culture with the Four Seasons, that's different amongst what I would get at a Holiday Inn Express, is like, I know the experience I'm getting when I go to that particular hotel. And what I'm looking for as a consumer is like, I know they have the right macro based breakfast items that'll make my life easier that I don't have to pay for. Right. But like for other people, it's all about the experience. My uncle's very much in that. He's in the marketing field. And so he's like, you know, kind of like you said, is like, I want to be greeted with the stuff they probably already know that I like, which again is just a whole different way. Like you said, it's not as analytical in a sense, but like, why do these people keep coming back? Because we're serving them carrot juice. Like, we want to be able to, I think everybody like is in search of that. And again, like, how does one get a culture of like a large scale entity to do that? Like, how are they teaching that? You know, like, is it something that's taught? Is it something that's innate? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's tough. I don't think it's innate, and I think it takes a ton of bravery that should trickle sort of top down. Because I don't think it's about that I liked carrot juice. It doesn't matter if I like carrot juice or pineapple juice or a glass of, broken eggshells every morning. Like it doesn't matter. It's that they went out of their way. So it's less about personalization and more about sort of real effort. I see you, etc. Soul Cycle does an incredible job of sort of making you feel cared for. You know how much it costs them? A bottle of water. Like just being able to give you that, when you show up, voila, here it is. Have a great whatever. It's also an amazingly cult-like, community-built experience. But I think they do a magnificent job of that. Solidcore does a magnificent job of spotlighting, people in their community. So it's less about personalization, because I see clients all the time being like, how can we give every single person in this community a feeling like we know them and what sort of they want? And before you know it, you're making carrot juice and apple juice and orange juice, and you've got to cater to everyone. And if you fail at that, you're going to get the pitchforks and whatever, as opposed to, brands thinking, no, like, how do we look at our marketing budget and devote sort of more money to showcasing and going above and beyond and showcasing that effort, versus let's put all our money towards just kind of spray and pray stuff. It's basic like annoyance psychology. If we're just in your face enough and you hear our name get said enough, you're more than likely to buy it. And that may have worked before when there was only so many brands in the world. But I don't need drop crotch pants Instagram, so stop pushing them to me. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't, like, we're now in an era where that whole psychology is almost flipped. You're going to affect more animosity by just bothering them all the time and nudging and nudging and nudging. And I know this, I've read the book. Everyone's read the book. But I think with a lack of creativity behind the nudge, it actually just yields annoyance.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Being a little more subtle, less in the face. being able to remind and showcase and not necessarily like buy my stuff, you know. It's you got to
Yeah,
have some creativity.
and Seamus, this is kind of what we started talking about vis-a-vis balance. When I look at a marketing strategy and how it's going to manifest for that brand on a calendar, what are we posting when? What are we emailing when? What are we whatever? Rule 1 is never do the same thing twice. Rule 2 is have like a dozen things you can do so that it never feels like you're doing the same thing, even in any sort of close proximity. Solidcore, just as an example, but it's the same for Rumble, it's the same for Mosaic, it's the same for and Pizza. Except these are all very different businesses that sell very different things.
Yeah.
If you post a BOGO on a Monday, you better make sure that the email you're sending on Tuesday is all about your philosophy as a brand. Has nothing to do with product. You don't even say what product you're selling. It's just all about we believe in something. And the text message you send on Wednesday should just be about some cultural moment, and you're showcasing the fact that you're part of the community, you see the same things they do. Because as someone said to me years and years and years ago, and this came off the heels of I don't know if you remember this, but the Levi's Go Forth campaign.
Yeah.
So the Levi's Go Forth campaign was a revelation, and and I'm thankful to have been in some proximity to it enough to have heard the geniuses behind it say, if I were your friend and all I ever did was talk about my jeans, we probably wouldn't be friends. And so we, as a brand that sells jeans, we need to think about other things to talk about so that when we hang out with our consumer, we're not just saying 25% off your next 501s. Because you're not going to make friends that way. And I think this is the dynamic that's just so different. And it's been, ramping up for many years. I'm not saying anything that's like brand new or whatever. But I keep going back to it's a science, and it's a science of balance in what you're selling and how you're selling it, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean that, it's important to also dive into that. Viore, needs to also be balanced in their messaging, just like Solidcore does. If all they ever show me are, aspirational people as opposed to approachable characters, they're going to lose me because I'm never going to be that cut. Ever. Never, never, never. But at the same time, if they only show me approachable and never give me the Adonis that I'm dreaming I can be, it's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that. Oh, we're coming full circle on that. Go ahead, Marcos.
No, it really is. Like, I think that the whole key element and message of like this talk has been about this balancing act of how to understand what you need to do as a brand or as a person of what you're selling. And the company I used to work for, he kind of had it down in that sense where he's like, on Monday you should post this, and this is like shouting somebody out, like the personal reflection piece to that person. And Wednesday it should be, a tip and a trick and things that help you and your clients have success. And then Friday is like a transformational photo, so kind of showing what people can expect when working with the company. And circling back to that, it's like that makes complete sense. It's like there's a little bit of everything that people would expect out of nutrition coaching, right? And again, but still fostering this idea and core element of community vibes and like what you get out of getting into the group, essentially, even though you're getting coached one-to-one. So but that's kind of what you said, is like, hey, if you're always just showing one thing, you kind of seem like a one-trick pony and you don't have any relatability. So balancing that and balancing, balance, I feel like isn't that we're all in search of? Like Nutritional Coaching Institute, Jason, person I worked for, we all sat down inside of a room, I'm pretty sure it was the Aria Hotel because that's where he stayed. And we drew a triangle on a whiteboard. And on that triangle, it was aesthetics, performance, and longevity. And you're trying to get right in the center of that. And that thing has been what he's ran with in his messaging for years now. Because while you're chasing that middle point, that balance piece, you're going to ultimately bias something somewhere, and you have to be able to identify if that's important to you or not, you know? So that balancing message is like
Dude,
so appropriate once again.
I have that same triangle. I say it all the time. The triangle is, for me, brand, performance, and local, or whatever, whatever local means to the given business. Like, someone needs to be in charge of marketing this brand as if it were a person that's got a perspective on things, and it believes in stuff, and it lives a certain way, and it's fallible, and it's either insecure or super confident or whatever, but there's a person to it. Performance is all the things that are still really important in terms of, we live in an age where there isn't just a billboard anymore. And what was a billboard is now very dynamic, and, the billboard talks back at you, and, whatever. And someone needs to be looking at all that data and telling me, hey, we should put more money towards this and towards that. But the message needs to ultimately be coming from the brand. And then local is, and I don't give a shit if you don't have retail, or if you rely on third party retail or whatever, or if you're a purely digital brand, I don't care. Like, you need to be thinking about the activation, the palm to palm, the like getting to know your consumer, and showing up for them. And that can come from packaging to experiential to literally your shop, to whatever the case may be. That's the balancing act in marketing. And that's just one of many, which then leads me to maybe kind of the last jewel of wisdom I can provide. I'm a brand strategist, and I can tell you that at the end of the day, all strategies really come back to adaptation. When my clients ask me, hey, what's the strategy that we need to bring us out of bankruptcy, connect to a new consumer, introduce this new product, open up a new market, whatever the case may be. Whatever I tell them, and there's myriad different forms of it, but it really only amounts to, this is a guiding principle for activating adaptation. Like, this strategy needs 2 years to fully realize. And we're going to be in the trenches, and some shit's not going to work, and we're going to have to tool that differently, and so on and so forth. But if the strategy is right and the objectives don't change, then you commit to that and you follow it through. Because what I've seen too many times is you hit the ground, you've got this strategy, you launch the new thing, or you've shown the new positioning, or it's, whatever. And how do I measure it? And, is the engagement right? Or whatever the case may be. And it's so quick. It's so easy to pull back from that strategy. You've got every other agency who wants to eat that scope saying, oh, it's not working, we need to do something else. You know what you need? You need it to be pinker, or you need it to be more Gen Z, or you need it to be whatever. And everyone's got a fucking opinion about whatever. And it's all thinly guised to eat more margin and eat more scope and whatever. Fine, that's the game. But it takes real bravery to, see what a strategy is trying to enact, commit to it, and see it through, and balance it as you go. Because hell, none of us knew COVID was going to happen. Do you know what it was like for my strategy work at Rumble? When all of a sudden we're all locked down? Or conversely, like, what do you do with a bunch of pizza shops, when no one can get to them, and you're terrified about opening a box and ingesting a bunch of airborne virus? Like,
Yeah.
shit changes. And
Yeah.
that's just the tip of the iceberg. Shit changes every day. So yeah, I think balancing really takes having a very clear vision or strategy, committing to it, having the right people around you, and being brave as shit to really see it through despite every naysayer. It's so easy to, put an opinion towards it and offer no solutions. We get that all the time. And to believe in the power of creativity. There's a magnificent Simpsons episode, and maybe I'm showing my age, but Simpsons are still cool as hell. In fact, they're having,
So cool.
they're having a resurgence. Anyway, there's a great episode where Homer goes to Lollapalooza, and he is a carny. He's a sideshow freak, and he gets shot in the stomach with a cannon. That's his thing. And all of this is in an effort for his kids to think he's cool. And so coming home, from this ordeal, he's in the car with the kids, and he says something to the effect of like, "See, kids, like, didn't I prove to you I'm cool?" And the kids, of course, in their typical 90s cynicism, say, "Oh, well, the mere fact that you have to call that out is so uncool." And then Marge says, "Well, I don't get it. Like, what does it take to be cool?" And Bart says something to the effect of, "Well, if you're just cool, then you know it, and you don't have to do anything about it." And she says, "Well, how do I know if I'm cool?" And he says, "Well, you just do." And that's where the episode ends. We are in a business of selling cool. And the coolest thing ever, and go back to Becker on this one, is creativity. It's close to godliness. It's what differentiates us from all the other terrified animals that live on this planet and are fight or flighting all day. We have creativity. And so I don't think there's any better metric or measurement or platform or whatever. You lead with creativity, and creativity comes from human insight. And that's going to win every time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the same procedure and
go ahead,
protocol you
Marco.
just mentioned, though, like that same procedure literally is the same application of a nutritional plan or exercise regimen, is the adaptability of it. But like the key points and metrics that you listed, like those big four, is literally like you literally describe the coaching process, which is like paralleled to branding process, right? Like as you're mentioning
There it
that, I
is.
think a lot of people may not recognize that. I'll have to go back. Can you think you could repeat those four again? How you mentioned it? Probably not.
Oh God, what did I say? Set a vision. No, I got you. Set a vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Create some sort of strategy for the behavior change that you're kind of looking for. And I love the fact that we're coming around to, like you should see marketing as behavior change, not as sales. Like you're going to convert them, but you're going to convert them better through a behavior change mindset than from a buy this fucking thing, like whatever. So adapt, and create a feedback loop. Every week I'm meeting with my client teams on the marketing projects that we're doing. We're evaluating how the brand's performing. We're evaluating what the kind of commentary that we're getting on it is. We're performing in a certain way and then adapting that performance, for what we want to achieve the next week. And it's all step by step, day by day, in the grind. There's no silver bullet. And then number four, I think is, carving out. Well, number four was bravery, right? That was my point. Like the bravery to commit to it,
and community.
stay with it.
Yeah. You said, I think when
For
you did
sure.
3, you said
Putting
community and bravery. Yeah.
Let's add a fifth. Have a community around you that's in support of it and maybe doing the same kind of thing as you. And then the last part that I would say, and I think I'm probably screaming into a void on this one, but slow down. Like, for the love of God, slow down. Everyone slow down. Like, I see so many, and I know what it's driven by, and it's, we need more capital, and it's always the thing. We need more capital. We're raising capital. We've got a board of directors. They want us to sell more, all of that kind of stuff. I get it. But every time a founder, a leader, an executive is able to recognize the importance of I need you guys to carve out some time every week to just think creatively about where we're going and so forth. The benefits have been astronomical. And pizza was a great example of that, and the founder was wonderful about doing that all the time. Gloss Lab, this is a nail salon, but doing amazing things, very innovative. And the founder, God bless her, is genius enough to have realized that, like, we set a strategy, we commit to it. Um, she has proclivities towards more product focused, more promotion focused, etc. But she gives us a lot of latitude on, I want you guys to be as creative as possible and really sort of give our community something that they don't otherwise get from elsewhere. And she gives us the time to really do that. And, she has a tremendous amount of pressure from her board. But that she commits to that, I think, is a really beautiful practice, and probably one that's as applicable to marketing a product as it is to changing your own sort of life and your own behaviors and so forth.
I love it.
Yeah.
Arnava, I'm gonna put this bookend here just because we're over an hour, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time here. Marcos, man, I think we gotta like download over the weekend and this is so good. We'll probably do like a second part with Arnava. This is so good. I mean,
if he has the
remarkability and brand. It's remarkability and brand, and just kind of all those pillars you talked about. And man, the stories here, I think our audience, I think you hit a lot of points, but let's just bring it down to one thing: consumer psychology for business owners, brands. Like, I think they could take from this and they could really utilize it. I know we will, and I know the folks that around us will start thinking a little bit there. So, Arnava, thanks so much for the time. I want to make sure we're respectful of that. Where can people find you if they want to work with you? Someone's listening on here, they've got a brand they want to maximize or anything like that. Where can they find you? And we'll put that in the show notes for you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the time. My agency, we are very clandestine. We're actually also going through a rebrand right now, so I'm taking my own medicine. So I think the safest thing right now is to just find me on LinkedIn, Arnava Asen. You're not going to find anyone else named Arnava Asen. And that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. And moving forward, I'll be promoting, a differently named agency, but at the end of the day, it's myself, it's our operations director, it's our creative director, and it's our community of, freelancers across every kind of brand and marketing need. We are agnostic in terms of, yes, we do, a ton in the fitness space, but we also work a lot in food and bev, consumer packaged goods. We've been blessed with a lot of hospitality work. We've been super blessed over the last year to be a part of the tsunami that is, consumer healthcare, and a lot of changes in that space. So yeah, we're insight driven, creative first, strategy always kind of people.
Amazing.
Love it. Well, guys, you heard it here. Arnava Asen, hit them up on LinkedIn, and they're going to rebrand soon enough. And if you're in those industries, could help you out and turn it around, whatever you're looking for. We'll put that in the show notes below. But other than that, macro perspective peeps, we're out. Thanks so much.